On with Ubaldi Reports, the one podcast that provides fact, not fiction, on issues facing America, whether domestically or internationally. And we're hosted by three Marines, 2 combat Marines who both served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Ray Krause, who is also a Marine but medically retired. So we're talking about issues that definitely confront America, and there is a slew of issues out there. But before we get started, let me introduce my 2 co-hosts. First is Big Bad Joe Bitts, who is a combat Marine from Iraq, wounded in Iraq. And then there's Marine veteran Ray Krause. So how are you going, Ray and Joe?
I'm good. How are you?
Great, John. How are you?
No, it's good. Now, there's a lot to talk about. Now, it was interesting when we did this. We were originally going to do it about the issues with the American military, which
we
still are. But we decided to change the topic because last Thursday, President Biden and his in the White House released his Afghan report, and for the 12 pages, and I read it, and it was consistently blaming the Trump administration. And
how were they blaming the Trump administration?
Well, they said they were hamstrung by the agreement that President Trump struck up with the Taliban in the spring of 2020.
So, per your knowledge of that, is that was the extraction point when it came to Afghanistan that same extraction time?
No. The president, I can't remember when the extraction date was there, but President Trump set it in motion. Now, whether you agree with it or not, I was kind of critical of President Trump. I thought we should have kept a presence there.
Yeah.
We really shouldn't have been too reliant on the Taliban. And I think, but in deference to President Trump, he was like, we've been there for 20 years. What are we accomplishing? But he put his in condition-based.
Yeah.
Taliban, you must do this if we're going to do this.
Now, the Afghan report is just one thing that this administration blames Donald Trump for. I mean, they've been since they started their administration. He's been kind of
getting blamed for everything.
He's been a scapegoat of the Biden administration more than.
Well, every administration always blames their predecessor, but at a certain point, you got to take responsibility. Now, a couple things came out of it. He blamed Donald Trump for being hamstrung into that agreement. But my point is, out of everything Donald Trump did, you rejected and overturned everything but this one.
Yeah.
Then you said the military leadership wanted us out. That's false, because every military commander, whether retired or current, who was involved in Afghanistan, and I talked to a senior military commander at one of the regional commands, combat regional command, who oversees that area of the world, said, no, we wanted to keep a residual force there. And he rejected the commanders. Then the other thing is he said nobody foretold or could predict the collapse of the Afghan army this quick. Well, that's false, because I was following it just on the open source that I get from different news sites that the Taliban were taking town after town after town. And even General McKenzie, who was then the commander of U.S. Central Command, said if we pull out precipitously the way we did or will do, the Afghan army probably wouldn't be able to stand up. So, but last point, but then when he pulled us out, he did it in the middle of the night, and he abandoned our European allies. They were stunned that we left without even notifying them. So at some point, President Biden, then if you go by there's a book called The Afghan Papers. It was put together by the Special Inspector General of Afghan Reconstruction. And what they said is there was no plan once we were pulling out. Once they fixated the date, the original date was September 11th to show this is the 20th anniversary of the war starting. We're pulling out of the 20th anniversary. Biden didn't like that because it wasn't going well, so he made it earlier. But once he made his announcement in mid-August that we were definitely pulling out by the 29th, that they didn't even have a plan. And us three being in the military, when you do a non-combatant military operation where you evacuate civilians, the latest one before that was in 2006 when they did a non-combatant evacuation off the coast of Lebanon because of the Hezbollah-Israeli war. The State Department takes the lead. They need to know who's where, who's doing what citizens, all the different host nationals all the different visas. That's the State Department job. But in that Afghan reconstruction of Afghan papers, the State Department didn't have a plan even up until the time and even afterwards when President Biden made his speech to the nation. We're pulling out.
So what I want to go is maybe one president more to blame than the other? Does Trump have any? Is Trump's hands clean on this?
No, there's some little bit of dirty on that because of how the deal was structured, but it was still condition based. The reason why both Republican presidents, starting with George Bush and ending with Joe Biden, is there was no clear-cut avenue to what we were trying to accomplish. Now, George Bush took us into Afghanistan, and everybody supported it, including Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
But what Bush did, he kept a low profile, limited troop, because we didn't want to antagonize the Afghan and duplicate what the Russians did. But then at the same time, the war in Iraq took place. But he didn't source it correctly. And then when Obama took over, he said this was the good war. So he ramped up more troops, but then he pushed more money into the system. So they talk about the corruption of money, but we fueled the corruption by giving these individuals, these warlords, these Afghan officials, all this money, but there was no clear-cut strategy of what we were trying to accomplish. Are we nation building? Are we trying to establish a government? Mm-hmm. And there was no coordinated efforts. And the military has a lot to blame too. How we trained the Afghans, how we did things. So there's nobody's hands are clean, but the one thing on the Afghan report, once it was released, nobody's been held accountable.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know.
Except for Donald Trump.
Yeah, but here's an example. All three of us have been in the Marines.
Yeah.
What happens if you lose your rifle?
Held accountable.
You're freaking done.
Yeah, and anybody else, anybody in the leadership position attached to you is done
as well.
Yeah.
But why is it when you lose a war, nobody's held accountable? What happened to the accountability of Lloyd Austin? What about General Milley and all the commanders that were involved up until that point? What happened? How come nobody's held it? And they get promoted.
Mm-hmm.
Lloyd Austin got a promotion to Secretary of Defense. So where's the accountability factor? I mean, think about it. We lost, and I hate to use this term, we lost to a bunch of goat herders wearing flip-flops. Now, this had ramifications because once we pulled out precipitously from Afghanistan, and Admiral John Kirby, who's the press spokesman used to be for the Pentagon, now he's with the National Security Council. He said, we're proud of what we did. We have some things to be proud of on that operation. 13 soldiers and Marines were killed. Air Force personnel, and it wasn't officers, Air Force personnel were scraping bodies out of the wheel well of the Air Force planes landing in Qatar. So once we did this goes into Ukraine. I know, Ray, we've talked about Ukraine many times. Putin saw this, and he thought, oh, America is weak now. We can go into Ukraine. China's looking at it. Now, right now, China's surrounding Taiwan with naval forces. Are they going to look like they're going to go into Taiwan, and how would we respond? Now, it's not, you can say all you want what you would do or what you won't do, but the point is they don't see President Biden as a strong leader. Now, he's off in Ireland going over his roots, but at the same time, we got the crisis in Taiwan. You got the French President Mitterrand, saying we need to decouple from the dollar and decouple from the United States. We don't want to be dragged into a conflict with China. Now, the French have always tried to be the big boy on the block, but they don't have the resources and the cojones to back it up, meaning financially, economically, or militarily. And that this is the same thing that President Charles de Gaulle did in the late 1960s when he pulled out of NATO. But then you've got Brazil signing trade agreements with China, utilizing the yuan instead of the dollar as the reserve currency. Now you got someone typing in.
Yes, I got Ramon Lopez 782 said, but you don't mention what did Donald Trump did. He made a deal with the Taliban.
He made an agreement with the Taliban, but it was I'm not saying I would agree with it. I think we should have kept reserve for, but we needed to change the whole entire mission of what we were trying to accomplish in Afghanistan, because once we pulled out and we left this major base that could have kept an eye on Russia, could have kept an eye on China and the other Middle East regions. We lost that capability right in the deep of the heart of the Central Asian republics. So I disagree with Donald Trump did, but his agreement was condition-based. You must do X, Y, Z, and if you don't, we will do X, Y, Z. But what Joe Biden did, he didn't listen to his command. He said he listened to his commanders, and one of the things he said is, the military commanders agreed with we should have pulled out of Bagram. No, what happened is that he set the parameters, meaning he told them, we're not going to increase troop strength, we're going to decrease. So the military commanders had to make a decision. We can't protect both bases, so let's just consolidate our forces to the to the airport. But there was no plan how you were going to execute removing all these individuals. John Kirby, who I mentioned earlier, said we war gamed having to go back in to get American personnel. But okay, if you war gamed it, why did it turn out so badly? We still have Americans well over a year later still stuck in Afghanistan. We still have Afghans who worked tirelessly with us. And anybody who saw that once we pulled the contractors out who supported the Afghan Air Force, that everything was collapsing. Even the Afghan commander at Bagram was stunned when he came in the next day and the Americans were gone.
Hey, one of the TikTokers were saying that that Donald Trump let 5,000 Taliban terrorists go free.
I heard that story. Now, on that, when you do with the counterinsurgency, and this isn't me saying this is one of the counterinsurgency experts is David Kilcullen, who was the counterinsurgency expert from Australia who worked with David Petraeus. You're going to have to do some type of agreement with the counterinsurgency force, like a Taliban or whoever you're fighting, and from that. So you were going to have to release something. There had to have been like that, whether you agree with it or not. It isn't clean. Counterinsurgency and fighting like that is never clean. But the whole point is how we left in August. No one's faulting for us to pull out of Afghanistan. It's the way we pulled out and how we did it and how we didn't coordinate with our allies. President Biden said he wanted to work with our allies to reestablish our relationships that were fractured because of Donald Trump. Well, when you pull out in the middle of the night, you never let our European allies know. You never let our Australians, our allies know. You just left, and they were left holding the bag like, what the heck is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a problem. But when you keep blaming the previous administration, and like I said, if you didn't like his agreement, why did you not deviate from it? And you made the decision on the date and the manner and everything with it. That's the problem. So this is on Joe Biden, not Donald Trump.
So going into like our military and stuff like that, where you really wanted to kind of focus, is that, I mean, how are we or in our military being affected now from what's going on?
Well, a lot of it, they're still reeling from the Afghan withdrawal. But the other problem is, and again, I talked to the senior level commander from one of the combat regional commands, and he says he's getting out. He said, I spend half my day dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion training.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to a person who came in the store that I work at.
How's that going to win wars, John?
And it's not.
Okay.
But I talked to a gentleman who came into the store. His son goes to the U.S. Air Force Academy. He's a junior, wants to be a fighter pilot. He says, we spend most of our time on training is on diversity, equity, and inclusion training.
Now, what if I know what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, but I don't use it against the enemy, and that is affecting them? Is that an effective strategy?
It's not, because if you look at now, there have been different reports. There had the Heritage Foundation looked at the different branches of the service.
Mm-hmm.
They only found the Marine Corps as strong. They looked at the other branches, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force as weak or marginally proficient in what they need to do. And then in 2021, there was a Marine Corps general and a Navy admiral. They wanted to look at all the naval collisions they had over the last few years. And what they wanted to see, is this an aberration? And that culminated with the fire on the Bonhomme Richard, which has eventually it's going to be decommissioned and scrapped.
Mm-hmm.
But so they wanted to see, is this an aberration, or is this something of a greater trend? And what they found out, and one retired chief said this, we're great when it comes to diversity and equity training. But when it comes to doing our job, we're not ready. Now, the Center for Strategic International Studies found that if we went to war with China over Taiwan, within 1 week, we would expend all our anti-ship missiles, all our rockets, everything would be done, because you fire more in war than you do in peace.
Mm-hmm.
Then, by going to war with China over Taiwan, we would win, but it would be such a Pyrrhic victory, meaning we would win so badly and bloodily that it's almost a loss. We would lose 2 aircraft carriers and a bunch of capital ships and thousands of troops, because we're not investing in the naval forces we need. We're not investing in our industrial military capacity, like building up arms. We're right now, from this report and these exercises, we're 13 years behind to making sure we're fully stocked. Now, we're expending a lot in Ukraine, but we're not doing anything to fix this and remedy this.
Well, it almost seems like, and this is just me thinking this is not true. I don't have any facts based on this, but it almost seems like Russia, China, and Ukraine are all in cahoots with each other, where like Russia's like, ooh, I'm going to attack Ukraine. And Ukraine's like, hey, America, help us. And then America's like, okay, we'll give you all our stuff. Okay, because we don't need it right now. And then China's like, oh, yeah, we're going to go after Taiwan. And then we're like, oh, hey, Taiwan, we want to help you, but we can't. We gave Ukraine all our stuff.
The thing is, Ukraine didn't do this to say, look, to draw America in. This is all Russia and China. What they've seen is, remember during the campaign, Joe Biden said, Putin doesn't want to see me as president because I've been tougher on Putin. Mm-hmm. Putin actually wanted Joe Biden as president. I'm not saying he did anything like this disinformation campaign. He really wanted a Joe Biden presidency, because think about it. As soon as Joe Biden came in, we got rid of Nord Stream. Excuse me. I'm sorry. You're right. Keystone XL pipeline was gone. We ended American energy dependence. We gave Russia. We unlifted the sanctions of Nord Stream 2, which provided energy from Russia into Western Europe. We saw that Russia hacked into our energy grid, and Joe Biden said, don't do this again, but don't hack into these XYZ. We did a massive pullout of U.S. forces from Afghanistan. We've kind of really slowed the growth of our military. We're not building certain things in our military. And it just showed weakness after weakness. And the Chinese, remember, China was the one responsible for unleashing the coronavirus. And remember, during the campaign, Joe Biden said, I'm going to send a team into Wuhan. He's never mentioned the origins of COVID with the Chinese leadership.
Go for it, Ray.
So Booster Gold 2442 said Keystone Pipeline has nothing to do with energy.
It has everything to do. It's to set the parameters for energy. It's one aspect. You do that, you limit some of the pipelines they wanted to do. You cut back on the permitting process. You forced what the Biden administration's done through the SEC and the Federal Reserve, forcing banks not to loan capital to the energy companies. Now, when people hear energy companies, they automatically assume it's Exxon, Chevron, Mobil. A lot of the oil producers are just your mom and pop. Mm-hmm. So when you put all these restrictions, and now they want to do that, you have to factor in climate change before you loan out money. So when Joe Biden said during the State of the Union address, he told the energy company, we need to produce oil because we're still going to use oil for the next 10 years. The energy companies are not going to invest back into their companies knowing in 10 years you're out of business. Who would? Mm-hmm. Tell me what company would invest in a company knowing in 10 years that company's out of business. It's just not going to happen. So it's not it's not all of it, but it was a start to send a signal that this administration, the Democratic Party, is anti-fossil fuel. And we're going to see prices rise now, because think about it. OPEC and Russia caucuses with them is going to limit production starting next month. That's why you're seeing prices rise, because now we're switching from a winter blend to a summer blend. So what does the Biden administration do? They want OPEC to produce more, and that's why they lifted some of the sanctions against Venezuela, So we're asking other countries to produce energy, but why we're not?
So I really wanted to get more into the. I guess there was a leak or some
yes.
classified documents released. I don't even know what they're about. I just know that they're releasing, and then
Well, there was stuff on Russia, there was stuff on Ukraine, China, Israel. There's a lot of things. There was a lot.
Okay, and how is that impactful? Of like, is it showing America what's actually going on, or what's going on?
This one was different from the Bradley Manning and the Eric Snowden. Those leaks they had older information, but it was also just on I think on our equipment type thing or our software. This one was different. This one goes to human side. Like when they released the classified documents, they released that we had information inside the Russian military department.
Mm-hmm.
So now Russia knows, okay, only certain people had this information, so they could whittle it down. So when you go to human sources, you're talking people's lives here.
Okay, so somebody that divulged the information to the U.S., Russia can locate who that person is.
Correct. Now,
whether they're U.S. or not?
Correct. Now, this is the one thing I don't have proof on this. I'm just speculating this. I'm just saying I can just see a pattern until we find out who did it. And they should be able to find out if they want to find out. But I think what happened is it's probably somebody who didn't like the policy we were pursuing and decided to leak this out. So maybe this would change policy. Because remember, during the draft document of the abortion ruling, the Supreme Court was leaked, hoping that might change the direction of how the justices were going to vote.
Yeah.
Remember during the first impeachment of Donald Trump, or Colonel Vidman and others released they thought this phone call was very damaging, and he was trying to tell the Ukrainians, if you don't do this, you're not getting this quid pro quo.
Yeah.
So they released it. It was damage to Donald Trump. So you have bureaucrats thinking they know what's best, leaking this information. But the damage it does is to our human, so they know how we're doing things. But it also shows to the world you can't trust the United States when it comes to classified materials or sources or methods. Because why would you speak to America knowing what you say or do or give is going to be leaked out at some point?
What's the purpose of them leaking this information out? What is it?
I just think maybe, and again, I don't have evidence to back this up. I just think they don't like a policy we're doing. Maybe they don't like what we're doing in Ukraine. Maybe they don't like what we're doing with our role with China or Israel, because this was damaging to Israel, how the Mossad, which is the Israeli intelligence network, was getting involved in domestic protests. I don't know. If they have something against the policy, they think it would be embarrassing to the United States, but it's also damaging to our efforts overseas, because now countries are going to be wary of doing anything with the United States. If you were a foreign national working with the United States, maybe against Russia or against your country, why would you join up with the United States knowing your name is going to get leaked?
Mm-hmm.
So this is very damaging. And the problem is we don't hold anybody accountable. We don't. We just, like Eric Snowden, Bradley Manning. Yeah, he was convicted, goes to prison, but Barack Obama pardoned him, let him go.
Yeah, and Snowden is what, still in Iran?
He's a Russian.
No. Eric Snowden is still in the run in Russia.
Yeah.
Then you have Julian Assange. I think he's in a prison out in Britain, I believe. But see, nobody's ever held accountable for their actions. They leaked. Congress leaks like a sieve. And then beyond that, there's other people who are very sloppily handling of classified material.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the other aspect. We are very sloppy how we do it.
Now, a little thing on maybe more of the domestic side is, the DEA of New York is suing Jim Jordan because he wants to subpoena him.
He wants to subpoena the judge, the Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA,
Okay.
and he says he doesn't have the authority. But yes, he does. You've pushed yourself into you made a state charge into a federal charge regarding a candidate of a major political party, a former president, potentially running for president in 2024, and federal dollars was given to the Manhattan DA. So was that money used to go after Donald Trump?
There was also something about well, we were talking about. Trying to figure out what else we got.
Well, the other thing that was
Oh
interesting.
no! Okay, now I remember that the Biden administration, they straight up denied the fact of the raid on Mar-a-Lago. They're like, the DOJ and the FBI, they did that on their own. We had nothing to do with it. And then something comes out to saying, yeah, we had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, the White House, and I can't remember where in the White House, but the White House did send information to the FBI, so that kind of counteracts what the White House is saying. So basically, Joe Biden, right now, going into re-election, is the most anti-free speech president since John Adams, and also he's the one president going after his political opponents. Now, everybody can say when Donald Trump was running against Hillary Clinton, he said, lock her up, lock her up. He didn't go after Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
So everybody's got to step back. Donald Trump is not above the law, but he's not below the law. Just because you don't like somebody, you can't go. And this charge by Alvin Bragg, the DOJ decided not to prosecute. The SEC decided not to. The previous DA in Manhattan decided not to.
But
even Alvin Bragg decided not to until these two rogue prosecutors who quit. One wrote a book about why we should get Donald Trump. And here's the most important thing. Alvin Bragg gets up there and says, well, I don't have to let Donald Trump know what the charges is that are against him.
Yeah.
Well, that violates...
Well, until the 18th of December.
Yeah,
right?
but see, that violates Donald Trump's constitutional rights, because in the Bill of Rights, in the Constitution, it states you have the right to know the charges being brought before you.
Couldn't he just expedite the trial and just kind of throw that in?
And I would have to find out from legal if that's the case, but they need to just realize this is going against constitutional rights. Now think about it. If they're going after Donald Trump since he came down that escalator in 2015, what would they do to you? What would if the IRS decided to look at your taxes? If you do your taxes on your own, the IRS will probably start looking at you. Are you going to have the resources? If the IRS said you own $1,000, are you going to have the resources to fight it?
No.
You're going to just grudgingly pay it, swear a couple times, and move on. But is that what we want? And look what the FBI did to Catholic churches. They were trying to infiltrate Catholic churches and organizations. This is what we want our federal government to do? You may not be Catholic, but what if they come after you? What if they came after organizations you belong to?
Well, that was another thing I heard, because you were once Catholic, or
Yeah,
you
I
grew
was.
up. So, and Biden has a certain stance on abortion, and yet he still proclaims himself as a Catholic. So does Nancy Pelosi. But just, I think it was just today, or just recently, Walter Reed took all the Catholic priests and kind of booted them from.
Yeah, they said they could no longer do pastoral services. They took a secular group to do that, but that secular group can't do the pastoral services, like probably give the sacrament, maybe give a blessing, or things like that.
So what kind of message are they sending there?
Well, what they're sending a message that if you're Christian, you're not welcome. This is a very anti-Christian administration. Now, here's an example. You had a transgender that defiled, I think, a Catholic church or a Catholic facility. The DOJ is not going to prosecute. But when it's a pro-life group or anybody who's pro-Christian defiles or does anything against pro-choice areas or groups, they're all over them. They tried to prosecute one guy because he just stood his ground. They said he threatened somebody, and it seems like the justice goes to one side when it's people they support, but it goes to the full weight of it goes against those they don't like.
So before we wrap up, Ray, do we got anything that you want to maybe approach John with to see if there's anything up topic?
The last point.
Good talk.
Yeah, there you go, Ray. The last point I want to bring up is just recently. Remember when oil prices per barrel of oil skyrocketed?
Mm-hmm.
Joe Biden said if it gets below $70 a barrel, we're going to fill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Oil got down to, I think the lowest is $60 to $65 a barrel. Well, now it's above $80. We didn't fill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It's at the lowest level since 1983. Now we're going into the summer months, and we live in Florida. We get hurricanes here. There's hurricanes hit Louisiana, the Gulf states. What happens if a hurricane goes into Louisiana? It doesn't have to be as bad as, Hurricane Katrina, but let's say there's a disruption there. That's going to spike oil prices, and the demand goes up. Since we got the Strategic Petroleum Reserves at its lowest level since 1983 when they started filling it. So that's going to be problems. We had inflation came down a little bit, but that's because the energy came down. Food prices are still high. I know some people here don't understand how much bread costs, but that's another story.
Hey. Okay, you know what? I want to defend myself on that one, okay?
Here's the
It's
story.
not,
Wait.
it's not okay,
Go.
hold
This
on.
is the guy that went to Publix,
Go
a
ahead.
grocery store chain.
I wanna-
Ray asked him, so Joe, how much does bread cost? We want to get an idea. And he's like, well, so you don't know, do you?
It's not, okay. Yeah, that's just it. I don't know. It's not that I don't care what bread costs. I just
Grab it off the shelf and throw it in the cart.
Yeah, but
And then you move
I mean,
on and pay the
But
bill.
I know what I need. I mean, I will go for.
$300. Huh.
Now, unlike
Man, this bread's expensive. I need to
Unlike
start
Joe,
couponing.
both Ray and me are very conscious of what things cost. Every time I go to the grocery store, I always look at the baby formula aisle. And that was a big crisis last year.
Hey, John, inflation's affecting me too, just not as much.
But when I looked at the baby formula aisle, it was virtually empty. Just because we're not talking about it doesn't mean it went away. Food prices are higher. Rent has gone up. Some things have come down, but now energy prices are going back up.
Yeah.
So I want to see what inflation is like in May for April.
Can't
Well, I
wait
did-
to
I-
pay that diesel price again.
Yeah, I noticed that too when I was filling up my vehicle, and I go, "Whew, that's a little." I mean, yeah, because I knew kind of like what my range of gallons were, and I'm just like, "Oh, okay, this is kind of get a little too much." Because I remember maybe no more than a year ago where it was costing me over. Oh no, the pump would cut off at $100.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And then you would have to reset it and then do another transaction.
2 transactions.
And I'm just like, because I don't know. I mean,
But everybody,
eventually you're gonna get that you're gonna go back to that tax bracket, and we're gonna live happily ever after,
That's it.
not caring how much bread costs.
but the one thing is, I do understand what people are going through. I talk to people who are not political. They are worried about rent. They're worried about food prices. They're worried about gas prices, energy prices, utilities. Especially we go into when it gets warmer. You're going to see more brownouts because a lot more natural gas plants have come offline. That's where the utilities get most of their energy. And wind and solar has not replaced that yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I do talk to people, and this is what everybody's concerned about. Then I work at a law enforcement supply company. I'm not law enforcement, but
Not a
I work.
cop.
Okay, but we sell a lot of firearms. And I've seen a lot more women coming in. And I talked, we had a woman transferred a weapon in that we were giving her back when she passes her background check. But she said, I want a firearm and I want a concealed carry firearm because I'm worried about my safety.
Mm-hmm.
I live by myself. I'm worried about my safety. I'm a mother. I've got 2 kids. So that's what I've been hearing. So these are things people are affected by, and they see an administration that doesn't seem to be doing anything to fix it. So I know what people are feeling. I'm stuck, struggling, keeping my head above water, hoping I can get this podcast up. So please spread the word. But it is tough out there, and it's only going to get tougher. But before we leave, Joe and Ray will talk about their podcast that they do. It gets a little more edgier.
If you could only have heard what we were talking about prior to the show,
Oh, yeah.
this is kind of stuff we talk about on our show. So listen to All American Gunslingers. We are on Apple Podcasts. We are on actually all where you can hear all your podcasts. Ray and I talk about guns. We talk about whiskey. And we talk about stuff that we don't talk about here.
Oh, yeah.
Fast.
And, and then Ray, how can they go ahead and get a hold of you?
They can get a hold of me at raymond.aags@gmail. We can talk anything Second Amendment related, gun control. We are looking at getting a building up in...
Oh, we got to tell them something else.
What?
Well, we got a website in the works.
Yeah, we do have a website. We have an allamericangunslinger.com website coming
Yes.
in the works, so that's going to be up soon.
Blow it up.
Yeah, we're going to have to blow this one up because we're going to do gun repairs, custom rifles,
Gun
some gun
sales.
sales, instructor courses.
Of course,
Yeah, so I mean, we're going to do this one up.
forums, podcasts, videos, all that stuff. So listen
they-
up for All American Gunslingers.
So they got a lot going on. Now, to follow Ubaldi Reports, you can go to all the streaming sites. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, obviously. Go to all your podcast streaming sites, Apple, Stitcher, Link. I was going to say Lipson. That's a gun company.
No, Lipson. Yeah, Lipson.
Oh, Lipson. Okay, but
Yeah.
we're all on all the streaming sites. Please spread the word, because I would love to do this 5 days a week, because there's so much to talk about and analyze. And we're in the process of trying to get some high-profile individuals who are big in the national political scene to talk about constitutional law as it relates to the Trump indictment and other issues, and talking about foreign policy and domestic policy. So keep following Ubaldi Reports. But until next time, keep following Ubaldi Reports. And we do this live every Wednesday, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. So keep checking out Ubaldi Reports. Till next time, keep listening.